I would like to invite Mr. Laurent Fabius to give a keynote speech, and we're very eager to hear about the Paris Agreement and the implications for Madrid. Please, very welcome.
Thank you so much. First, forgive me for my pidgin English, but you know, it's not easy for a French citizen to speak, to use a foreign language. Well, I'm very happy to be here and to meet again old and good friends, Jan in particular. And if I understand correctly, you are expecting me, from me, to give a global picture of where we are compared to the Paris Agreement that I had the honor to negotiate and to chair. How could I start? First, it's very paradoxical because I'm speaking here in a country which is in the vanguard of many things in the domain of environment. I wish every country would do the same, but unfortunately, what I will say is not very optimistic, because if we compare the commitments which have been taken in Paris and the actual results today, there is not only a difference, but a real gap. And that is my first comment. In Paris, quote, governments universally agreed to undertake rapid reductions in accordance with the best available science, so as to achieve net zero emissions during the second half of this century. And you know the words that we used and the commitment that every country in the world had taken to set the limit of temperature increase at the end of the century at 1.5 degrees, or at least 2.5 compared to pre-industrial times. And yet, in spite of the fact that every single country has committed itself to do so, the most recent models predict that global warming could reach more than 3 degrees and up to 7 degrees by the end of this century. This is my first and very brutal comment about the climate situation. It doesn't mean that everything is negative, not at all. We have the growing awareness of the situation. And I want, in particular, in this country, to pay tribute to our young people who, as I see them, are doing a magnificent job in order to develop the awareness of the whole society of these problems. That is highly positive. Second, very positive too, the action of cities. You will discuss that this afternoon, but it is true that what we call non-state actors are doing a great job, and this job is full of hope. Third, we have a shift in the awareness and the decisions taken by companies and many financial institutions, which is quite new. Katerina quoted the decision, very interesting, very important, very courageous, which has been taken by the European Investment Bank, not to finance any more from 2021. Maybe would have been better 2020, but okay, 2021, any activity in relation with coal, with oil, with gas as well. And you have to bear in mind that EIB is the largest public bank in the world. But it's true for different investors. Things are changing in this financial world, and it's very important too. But, and some governments are doing well, and technology is improving. But you have several governments, and particularly governments of major countries, which are not implementing at all their commitments, and obviously it makes an enormous difference. Figures have been recently published about the G20, which I say that will be presided over next year by Saudi Arabia, while the G7 will be presided by US, which means that probably we have not a great things to expect from these two important bodies. But all in all, we are not in line with the Paris Agreement. That's a fact. Now, a few comments about that. First, and I know that Jan will insist on that, it's not an hazard if SDG and Paris Agreement have been adopted in the same year, 2015, because there is a common, not only feeling, but will of action in those directions. And I know that Jan will insist on the fact that we have to develop the growing convergence between those two elements. 3 or 4 comments. The first one is about the institution of COPs. I was last week in Madrid, COP25, and obviously the contrast with the Paris atmosphere was very clear. There were a lot of publicities outside the COP25 in Madrid saying, time for action. But when you were discussing in the COP, it was different. I hope that Madrid COP will be able to solve some important but technical problems if there are specialists about Article 6 and Article 8. But it's very likely that the most important point, which is enhancing the ambition of every country, this aim will not be reached. And is it enough to say that COPs are not useful anymore? Because I listen to this music in some conversation. No, I don't think so. It's very important that every single year you have, under the chairmanship of UN, all the partners, not only states, but non-state actors, companies, NGOs, civil society, young people, everybody gathered together in order, in face of the world, to say, we have reached our commitments, or we did not implement our commitments. Up to now, during years and years, the idea was to set the rules. They have been set in Paris, and now we know the rule of the game. Okay. Now the next COPs will deal more with implementing Paris and delivering this idea. Are we in line? Are we not in line? Why? And how can we react? And I consider that these COPs are very, very important. And I do not agree with this little music that I'm sometimes listening to. Second, Katharina told us about some elements about the Green Deal. I was last week in Brussels discussing with Frans Timmermans. We will be in charge of implementing the Green Deal. We shall see this afternoon and in the next 2 days what will happen with it. But already we can say that it is a very, very, very positive element, and that it could give strong impetus, not only in Europe, but I would say in the world. Katharina, you have described the main elements. I would just have a technical comment. When you will see the decisions which are proposed, you will see things about carbon pricing. Carbon pricing is a decisive element, because if you want to give incentive in order not to use any more carbon, fossil fuel elements, and on the contrary, to use new energy and renewable, and if you want to combine the actions of government and the market rules, the pricing of carbon is decisive. And we shall see in the communication of the Commission what will be said exactly about it, because it's a tricky question. But when you are looking at the carbon pricing, you very quickly understand that if you don't have a mechanism at the borders, obviously it is detrimental to the competitiveness which is necessary, because it gives an advantage to those countries who have a low carbon pricing. Therefore, you need to have a mechanism. And the point that I want to stress, and it's not a minor point, it's how do you spell it? Because in the European regulation, if you call it taxation, it means that you need to have unanimous vote. If you call it a mechanism, it's not diplomatic vocabulary, it's low. It can be different. And therefore, we shall see what has been decided or proposed by the Commission. And obviously, it would be one of the difficulties. What about carbon pricing? What about this mechanism? How it will be introduced? And at that point, having said that the European deal is very important, I would like to add a new element. I think in the way we shall implement this deal, we have to take into consideration the relationship with China. Why? Because when you are looking at the figures, real figures, the main problem in terms of climate warming is called coal and it's called Asia. These are the main figures. Asia, it's not only China, it's India, it's Japan, it's Malaysia, it's Korea, it's okay. But these are the big ones. And when you're looking at the figures, even though there has been evolution, the program which is proposed for building new coal plants is a disaster. If it is financed and implemented, forget Paris. Therefore, the key question is to know whether or not they will be really developed, or if there will be alternatives. And obviously, if they are to be developed, they have to be financed. And it's not a hazard if Antonio Guterres, the President, Secretary General of UN, has said in the summit that was organized in New York in September that one of the key elements is to refuse any new coal plant after 2020, which is not at all the program, but which is decisive. And obviously, coming back to Paris, why Paris was a success. It's not due to the capacity of French diplomacy, no. It's not only. No, it's mainly due, to be serious, to the fact that scientists have done a magnificent job to convince people that the phenomenon did exist. It was due to the fact that civil society was acting in the right direction. But it's mainly due to the fact that we had an international context which was very positive. Because we had with us US, Obama, China, Xi Jinping, Europe, and India, Modi. Today, unfortunately, US are no longer in. And if we want to convince China to be still on board, we have to act with them as Europeans, because they won't go by themselves. Because not only of their ideology, they consider that they are a developing country and therefore they need to have a counterpart, rich country, but also because of a problem of competitiveness. And therefore Europe must develop its deal in a way which would be consistent with the positive action of China. It is absolutely decisive for the coming years. Third, the question of law, L-A-W. I may surprise you in speaking about law, not because now I am the head of the French Constitutional Court, but usually people don't speak about law when they speak about climate. It's a mistake. When you look at the situation, every single country has committed itself in Paris, and their commitments are not implemented. It has something to do with law. I know that the Paris Agreement is not law in the sense that it is not an international treaty, but it is a commitment. And therefore, at a national level and at an international level, we have to speak in terms of having new laws which will be implemented, I mean, with sanction, not to put the heads of state in prison, it's not that case, but to have at a national and international level elements which can decide what are the principles, the main principles, which will be implemented by everybody. You have a series of declarations. The Stockholm Declaration, 1972, the Rio Declaration, 1992, but they have not this force which is necessary in order to be sure that the commitments which are taken are implemented. Now, another comment before my conclusion. Justice, just transition is a key. We have seen that in France with the story of yellow vest that you have heard of, but it's more general. In the Paris Agreement, 29 articles, 140 paragraphs of decisions, we have introduced this notion of just transition. But at that time, and I fully remember, we had in mind this fact, if a region is dealing with coal, and if there is no longer any coal, you have to take into consideration the situation of workers. Okay, not only for the region, but for the worker as well. But now the meaning of the word just transition is larger. You have to take into consideration to prepare the measures which will accompany the transition and which are in line with every individual situation. What do I mean? For instance, in France, the French government has decided at the moment to raise the taxes on fuel. Immediately, there was a rebellion by many people and finally, eventually, the general public, because people say, well, okay, you have decided that, but I'm living in the countryside, I must work in the town, I have to use my own car, and it means that I will lose a lot of money. And therefore, from many experiences, not only France, but Poland and many countries around the world, we know what to do or what not to do. There is no plan, no green plan, which can be efficient without a just transition plan. And it is the same in the European plan, and it is the reason of this fund, which has been decided. And there are some principles that now are nearly obvious. A, you have to take financial decisions in order to compensate what are the consequences if you raise the taxes. Second, the money that state gains through that taxation, it must be dedicated to transition and not to give the feeling that it goes in the pockets of state, because at that time people refuse it. And it has to be transparent. And it has to be accompanied by a social dialogue with unions, with people, with regions, in order that this progressive movement is organized. Otherwise, when you decide to have a transition, there is a reaction of the population who says no. Now my conclusion, 2 ideas. I was discussing with friends just before entering this room, and I was reminding them of a conversation I had with Michael Bloomberg when preparing the COP in Paris. And Bloomberg was saying to me, well, Mr. Fabius, be careful to 2 mistakes to avoid, okay? First, to speak only about negative things. If you gave the feeling that today the situation is difficult, which is true, tomorrow it is worse, and the day after tomorrow, I don't speak about it because it's terrible. If you give this feeling, it's true for a country, it's true for a family, it's true for a company as well. Therefore, the reaction will be no. Therefore, give hope. Don't say wrong things. Be in line with truth, but give positive example of what is being done. And it's why at the cities level it's so important, because cities are showing that it's possible, that it creates jobs, that it gives a better standard of living. We need to be lucid, but to be positive as well, first. Second advice of Bloomberg, develop a vision, because without vision, nothing is possible. But explain, too, that it is a short-term issue, today. And in particular, and this advice was right, speak about the consequences on health, not the day after tomorrow, but today. Speak about pollution, speak about things which can be considered and lived by individuals today. And I think Michael Bloomberg is right, and we have to work in that direction, and cities can help in a large proportion. Now, my last word, the calendars, the schedule, timetable. 2019, it's a mixed idea, a mixed year. The results are not good. There are some hopes, some difficulties. Unfortunately, I don't think that 2019 will be the year where which we shall be able to bend the curve. But 2020 must be the year in which we bend the curve. Why? Because it's in 2020 that every single country must propose new NDCs, as we call them, national determined contribution, and hence, first. Second, because in 2026, it will be, in 2020, unfortunately, COP 2026, 26, it will be the moment of truth, because it's the moment where the Paris Agreement is taking force. And it is the moment where we must meet with our future. The decision will not be only in the sector of climate. I used to say that one of the major decisions, and probably the major decision for climate in 2023, will be the American election. Because obviously, according to the fact that the president is reelected or not, there will be a big difference between the two. But anyway, 2020 must be the year. Recently, I had the visit by our British colleague who will be in charge of the COP26, and very kindly she was asking me advices, and I'd say, well, dear, I will not give you advices, but you must be conscious that according to the result of the American election, it will be different because it's only a few days before the COP. Either, and I don't want to have a diplomatic incident, the present president will be re-elected. And unfortunately, it's very likely that several countries, Australia, Turkey, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Japan, and so on and so forth, will say, okay, we have signed the Paris Agreement, but if the first power in the world is not implementing the Paris Agreement, is out of the Paris Agreement, why should we make the effort? And therefore, the COP will be difficult, and the implementation of Paris will be difficult, though we have, all of us, to make efforts to go in that direction. Or there will be a different electoral result. And I've said to my friend, British friend, when you will enter in the COP in Glasgow, before any conversation, any discussion, everybody will stand up and applaud you. Therefore, it's not a reason why not to prepare it, but it will be probably the situation. Now, a last comment. In the ordinary conversation, we very often say, it is a question of planet which is at stake. No. The planet will be there. It will be it will be wounded, it will be a different planet, but it will be there. No, the question is about mankind, and especially the poorest regions and the poorest people. And there are billions. And if we are not able to concentrate our efforts and to explain to people who are somnambulists that it is a major challenge for our generation, it will need not possible. Many people ask me, are you pessimistic? Are you optimistic? And I answer, well, we have no choice. We have to be volunteers. Thank you.